Am I about to, Adam, am I about to pay $2 at the Bowser?
No, look, I don't think you are. In fact, I think the oil price today actually fell back below $64. So I don't think that we're facing an oil crisis soon. In fact, for the past few weeks, the International Energy Agency has been saying that the world faced a glut of oil. So I think in the short to medium term, I think everything will be okay. I don't think there's going to be sharp increases at the Bowser, but the turmoil in the Middle East, as far as I'm concerned, is a further reminder to Australia and especially to the government that we really need to build up our reserves of oil. We, I think, are alone in the G20 in having less than 90 days, fewer than 90 days of storage. We have something like 55, and I just don't think that's acceptable.
No, exactly. And Jim Molan, who I've had on tonight, he's been on about this for, you know, at least 18 months, and very little has been done. Andrew, the banks. The scrutiny seems to be back on the banks, just when we thought they copped it at the Royal Commission. It's about fairness and competition at the moment. And I guess, you know, for someone like me who changes banks, relatively easy when I don't get what I want, I get the feeling that there's somehow collusion between what they do. They tend to move in the same direction at the same time, almost as if they're on the phone to each other, and I wouldn't suggest that they are. But there's more needs to be done about fairness for the customer.
I believe that's correct. I'm sure they're not on the phone to one another, but nevertheless, when you have a market so completely dominated or so heavily dominated by just 4 major banks, you actually have a lack of, well, I think we've clearly seen a lack of effective competition. And it was tremendously unfortunate that about a decade ago, St George and Bank West, which were the 2 up-and-coming sort of challengers, ended up being absorbed into the big 4. I think there are problems. Actually, I think what needs to happen is we need to encourage more of those young, smaller competitors. And so I know there's some talk about the ACCC, you know, perhaps investigating, perhaps setting up further inquiries and so forth. I'm not sure I think that's the most helpful way to achieve this. Actually, I confess, because I have precisely zero political sympathy for the banks anymore, if I were in the government's shoes, I'd be contemplating an increase to the bank levy, actually, and use that, possibly a small amount of those funds, to fund a increase to the banking ombudsman's power.
Well, that's a good idea. I like the sound of that.
Because that levy actually only affects the big 4, it actually provides a slight competitive advantage. You know, it's a deliberately manufactured one. As I say, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been advocating the federal government involve itself in this way. But since the banks have decided to start pontificating about every aspect of my life as well and tell me what I should do and think about all sorts of things, I've completely lost all my sympathy. So.
Well, they're just about to cop it again by the sound of it. Now, Qantas CEO Alan Joyce made the trip to Canberra, urging Treasurer Josh Frydenberg to regulate airports to stop them charging excess landing fees. He was joined by the other airlines as well. Mr Joyce said earlier on Sky News that there is a push for changes within the industry and government agencies.
So the ACCC has actually said that they think regulation is needed here. The ACCC said that the system is not working and it's broken. So, and I think that the previous heads of the ACCC have come out with this. Can I say, you know, what we after, just to be clear, we're after a negotiate arbitrate model. So we try and negotiate. If we can't get to a settlement, somebody independent, an independent umpire comes in and makes the determination.
Adam, when it comes to airlines complaining about the fact that they have to set certain prices on airline fees and they blame the fees that they pay to the airline, there's that. There's also the hire car companies, those that use the parking facilities. They are screaming the joint down and have done so for about 5 years because they're being charged, you know, excessive fees. We've made a bed for ourselves because of the monopolies, right?
Well, look, I think that's partly true, although I'm just not convinced that what Qantas wants is the right way to go. We've had this regulation regime for quite some time with the airports now. The Productivity Commission's recently come out and said in a draft report that actually the airports have not been using their market power excessively, and it's effectively compared the financial status of our 4 airports here with airports overseas, and there are really no major differences. The reality is the 2 airlines, especially Qantas, are actually very, very powerful in their own right. They have enormous market power. Qantas alone has 60% of the domestic market.
So are you suggesting they're having everyone on here, that they're making up the fact that they're paying too much?
Well, look, I mean, they might be paying too much, but the question for the Productivity Commission and the government is that what happens if those landing fees are reduced? The money will basically just go to Qantas. It won't go to passengers. Because Qantas already has so much market power. So it's a very delicate situation.
Okay.
And also it's worth pointing out that the terms of the lease from the government to the airports actually say that the airports have to accept all the airlines, Qantas and Virgin, and indeed Qantas doesn't even have to pay the fees that are charged if if it doesn't want to. So there's a strong incentive for the airport and for the airline to actually reach an agreement.
Reach a negotiation. Andrew,
yes.
When we have monopolies like we have at regional airports and capital city airports, there's either two ways we can go. Create competition by dividing the landing areas and the parking areas to two separate entities or more, or we put restrictions on the monopoly. What do you think is the best way to go?
Fundamentally, I confess I suspect you and Adam are more knowledgeable about the details of airports here, but you're right. There is a natural monopoly arrangement here. It's very difficult. You can't introduce more competition at an airport. You can't have two airports side by side or whatever. So fundamentally, the best model is probably not to have the government running them, but to have very tightly regulated. So you try to have private operators. They are provided with an incentive to try to improve their service by reducing their costs to increase.
So we put restrictions on the increases in costs for various services and fees at the airport?
Possibly, yeah, or exactly. Or you have to very closely monitor them. It's unavoidable in this situation if you're going to try to get the best outcome. Now, again, it's extremely difficult to muster any sympathy for Qantas because of all the monopoly things here, Qantas is, it exists in effectively duopoly, and it's by far the major partner here. So I very much sympathise with Adam's point that the great risk here is if you reduce the costs to Qantas, the people who will see those won't be the consumers, the airline passengers. It'll be the Qantas CEO.
They'll gobble it up.
The board, actually, that's right. So
it'll go towards the $24 million that Alan Joyce makes every year.
Indeed, yeah. So that's right. It's very difficult to muster any sympathy whatsoever for Qantas.
Okay, the most important question of the evening on the Credlin program has to be to you, Adam. Are you allowed to extract a story out of the midwinter ball? Because in previous years there was an agreement, wasn't there, that wouldn't happen, and those rules have been broken from time to time.
Yeah, look, I think it was broken 2 years ago, actually, by Laurie Oakes.
Yeah.
If my memory serves me correctly. Look, I certainly don't plan to write a story, and I hope no one else does either, because it's just going to mean that the speeches are far less funny, far less interesting. So I really hope this year that there are no stories about it tomorrow.
Let's hope. Enjoy your evening, mate. Well dressed. Looks great.
Thank you.
Good on you. Adam Crichton from the Australian newspaper, economics editor, and Andrew Stone. Andrew, thank you for your time as well.